Hey, on this episode, we're going to talk about physical therapy, EBITDA multiples, and valuations right now in 2023, moving into 2024. With a grain of salt, we're on the buy side. We are looking to do valuations, and we want to partner or purchase some or all of your practice. And you might have a broker or advisor who obviously will want to maximize your purchase price. You want to sell for max value, top dollar, get as much as you can for the time and the effort that you put into your practice. We understand that. And then brokers and advisors might be a little more incentivized to inflate, believe it or not, inflate the valuation of your practice because they might get 5 or 10% commission on your practice. Many brokers and advisors do that. Many of them are at the same time very even-keeled and provide appropriate and commensurate valuations for the strength and the value of your practice. Let's get into it. My name is Dave Kittle, physical therapist, owner of Concierge Pain Relief, home physical therapy here in New York City, and the CEO of the Fieldmaker Group, and we're speaking with practice owners about partnering and acquiring some or all their practice. And today, if you are listening on iTunes and Spotify, jump over to the YouTube. I have a screen share here, a Google spreadsheet. Let's get into it right now. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to fill out this spreadsheet right now. Again, revenue is not the biggest driver of valuations. The biggest driver here is adjusted EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. A big fancy word that basically just means, what is your cash flow? What is the net? What is your free cash flow? What is your net margin, your profit margin of your practice after add backs? We will, if we all sit down and sign an NDA and look at your financials and we talk and all that, there's going to be some personal expenses on the business books, potentially. Some practices operate that way and some don't. And if you have some, obviously, we'll take that into consideration. Don't even worry about it. Your broker and advisor will help you with that. Your trips, your cell phone bills, all your personal stuff, personal cars that don't pertain to your practice, to your business, we're going to take those off. You're going to get credit for those that go back to the profit section of this valuation, which is this adjusted EBITDA column here in column B on the spreadsheet. And we're going to get into it. So this is what we're seeing. Now, of course, like I said, take this with a grain of salt. You could share this with your broker advisor. They will maybe have on the higher end of some of these. And obviously we want to be maybe on the lower end of some of these. Maybe we find some common ground in the middle. But basically this, if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to break it down. I'm going to fill this in right now about what are the potential multiples, the specific number multiple that we will, or that your broker advisor might apply to your adjusted EBITDA number. Your adjusted EBITDA number, it is what it is, folks. And if you want to raise it and improve it, it could take 6 months, maybe 12 months. In some cases, maybe 18 to 24 months. It's basically the cash flow of your practice. So optimizing the, ethically and morally and appropriately and professionally with following compliance and everything, maximizing the profitability of your practice. So that's a whole other episode about capacity and reimbursement and payment and all that other type of stuff that we talk about here on the show. But today we're going to get into right now. If you have a practice and you're, let's say, I don't know, a couple $1 million in revenue and you have X amount of adjusted EBITDA, what is your dollar amount that we're going to see right now? Where kind of what bucket you might fall into, and then what you can maybe expect that us or other buyers out there might put some, whether it's a 3, 4, 5x multiple, 7 and 8x multiple on that adjusted EBITDA dollar amount. From there, we're going to get to a valuation column here in column D, but we're going to get into it right now. So let me pull up my notes here just so we can stay on track and be as efficient as possible. All right, so let's get into it. Again, revenue is not the biggest driver because you could have a practice with a large amount of revenue and maybe only at 10% profit margin, and another practice could have a similar EBITDA number and have a different valuation because of the different profit margins. So we're going to get into all that right now. Let's just say on average for practice, we're going to start kind of in the range of adjusted EBITDA number of $300,000 just for a starting point. So not always, but typically, if you have a 20% profit margin, which not a lot of practices do, or not many physical therapy practices do, some do, some are at 20, 25, maybe 30. And if you have less overhead and you're doing more home visits, maybe your profit margin is closer to 30%. Let's just say an adjusted EBITDA number of $300,000. So that's your net income after everything is paid, payroll, marketing, taxes, everything it is accounted for. Before taxes, $300,000 adjusted EBITDA after the add backs after we remove your personal items from the business books. And just for round figures, let's say if you're in that range of $300,000, what I'm going to do is just multiply that by 5. So that would be a practice that might be in the range of 1.5 million in revenue. Again, there's always going to be a sliding scale depending on who's watching or listening and how their practice is operating. Just for argument's sake, let's just start with this practice. We're going to apply a 3x multiple. Now, again, your broker advisor might want a 4 or 5, and then you might have buyers that offer you 2.5x multiple, right? So whatever, we're going to just kind of start here. Let's get into it. Adjusted EBITDA, $300,000, your practice or another practice, $1.5 million in top line revenue. Again, this revenue column in column A, we're going to ascend higher revenue as we go, obviously, but again, it's not the biggest driver, because there could be a practice that's doing, $10 million in revenue and have, 6% profit margin and a very small adjusted EBITDA number, and they will have a smaller valuation compared to a $10 million practice that has, 20% margins, right? So let's just say, for the valuation sake of this practice that has $300,000 in adjusted EBITDA, $300,000 times 3, and we're going to give that a practice a valuation of $900,000. Now, you might not be happy with that, or you might be upset at that, or whatever it might be, but that is where we're going to start as a starting point for right now. So for this type of practice, 3x multiple, again, there's a sliding scale that will depend on a lot of factors more than what we can cover here today. But let's just say for the next step up, okay, what if a practice has $400,000 in adjusted EBITDA? Let's just say we apply a 4x multiple on that practice. And again, we're going to take $400,000 right here, $400,000. We're going to multiply that by 5. And we're going to say this practice has a $2 million in revenue. Again, that's assuming that they're a 20% profit margin. But let's just say practices, again, the revenue bucket doesn't fully matter. But again, EBITDA here, we're going to take $400,000 times 4 to come up with a very simple, this is like back of the napkin math, $400,000 times the 4x multiple. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see I'm plugging in these simple multiplication formulas right here. I'm going to hit enter. Did I do that correctly? $400,000 times 4. Yes. $400,000. If you have $400,000, approximately $400,000 in adjusted EBITDA, and let's say your broker advisor or the buyers are submitting offers at a 4x multiple, you can expect a valuation of $1.6 million. A valuation meaning, hey, this is the purchase price. Then a whole other episode we've done before about 80 or 90 or 100% of that cash at close, or 50 or 75% of the cash at close, and then there's some earnout or whatever, seller finance and some other components, seller's note. Other episodes, other content, check the show, check the channel, Dave Kittle Show. Let's get into the next bucket. So let's say another practice down the road has, or a colleague of yours from PPS or whatever it might be, $500,000 in adjusted EBITDA. And let's just say for easy back of the napkin math, we ascend to a 5x multiple of that. We could just assume, we could say, okay, approximately $500,000 times 5, which would kind of give us that 20% profit margin. If this is assuming if they were at 20% profit, a practice that might be at $2.5 million in revenue, doing $500,000 in adjusted EBITDA, may be able to warrant or negotiate a 5x multiple on this $500K of adjusted EBITDA. So you, your broker, your advisor, or the buy side, us or other buyers out there might say, okay, $500,000 times 5, an offer or a valuation of $2.5 million for that practice. Again, sliding scale here. Let's just keep going. We'll try to make this as efficient as possible. Next bucket, and we'll jump ahead soon, but let's just say the next bucket of $600,000 of adjusted EBITDA. If you have a practice out there, $600,000 of adjusted EBITDA, let's say, just for argument's sake, 6x multiple on that. This practice might be, call it, so we're going to say, if we do 20% profit margin, I practiced it down the road doing $3 million. Again, it doesn't fully matter if it's one location, several locations. Obviously, the bigger these numbers get, you'd have to have a larger location, or maybe you have 2 or 3 large locations. We're looking at this company-wide, practice-wide. What is the adjusted EBITDA of this practice? So let's say down the road, there's a practice, they're doing $3 million in revenue, and they have $600,000 of adjusted EBITDA. They might fall into this bucket. You, your advisor, your broker, whoever's helping you negotiate, as well as potential LOIs, letters of intent, and term sheets that we're submitting or other buyers are submitting. And we say, okay, well, $600,000 in adjusted EBITDA, they might be in that range of a 6x multiple, which means, and if that's the case, the $600,000 times 6, a potential valuation of that practice of $3.6 million. So you can see here, like when you have a lower multiple, the valuations might be below the revenue number. So for the first example, $1.5 million practice, $300,000 in adjusted EBITDA, 3x multiple. A lower multiple because it's smaller, there's less scale, there's more risk involved, there's less team, there's maybe less structure, less processes in place. And so a valuation of $900,000 for the $300,000 of adjusted EBITDA at a 3x multiple. Now you jump ahead, a practice down the road doing $3 million in revenue, $600,000 in adjusted EBITDA, might be in that range of a 6x. Again, then you get into the practice when we're doing due diligence, and then we look at the accounts receivable. We look at how much of your practices is out of pocket or cash pay, or there's location and parking, and is the practice easy to find, or is the signage great and you have a great corner location or whatever. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it that'll slide you up and down the scale, of the sliding scale of multiple. But again, in this ballpark, let's get into the next bucket. So for argument's sake, let's say, let's jump ahead to $800,000 in adjusted EBITDA. So we went from 6 to 8, and let's call it, we're going to do 2 scenarios. So I'm going to say for the next 2 practices, say $800,000 in adjusted EBITDA. And let's call this, now we're going to $4 million in revenue, and we're going to say at a 10%, let's say closer to like 10% profit margin. So a little leaner, a little tighter margins, you still might be at a 6x multiple. It's certainly possible, right? So then let's say, trying to minimize the public math here, folks. So I'm using the good old spreadsheet and Google Sheets, like the old Excel. So we're going to say $800,000 times 6, a valuation of $4.8 million. Now, at the same time, let's just say comparatively, if this practice improved their margins, so we're going to say $4 million in revenue, and I could have done another column here for profit margin, but whatever. Let's just keep it going. $4 million in top line revenue, let's say at a 20% profit margin, the same adjusted EBITDA number, and maybe you can negotiate or apply a 7x multiple on the same number of EBITDA because this profit margin is better, and maybe the accounts receivable are more improved. There's the 90 days of accounts receivable, the 120 days of accounts receivable. Maybe those numbers are less and less, and you have better operations, better processes for billing, for revenue cycle management, all that type of stuff maybe. So if we say this is all the same practice, and this practice went through a transformation, they went from 10% profit margins to 20% profit margins. It could be over a year or 2 or so that you then demonstrate to the market, to the buyers out there, that you actually warrant or can negotiate a higher multiple, or basically a higher valuation. But here's kind of like breaking down the math, not just like, hey, we want this, like we want $5 or $6 million just because we believe that's what we're worth. Breaking down the math here. So again, we'll take the $800,000. All right, times 7. And look at this difference here. So let's just say this is one practice. Both are, so this is the same practice. Call it $4 million in top line revenue. And if they're doing 10% profit margins versus 20% profit margins. Now you want to be obviously closer to 20%, or if possible, 25, or if you have, again, more mobile, more home visits, less overhead components of your practice, remote programming, cash pay services, whatever it might be, then maybe you're closer to 20% profit margin. And for the same adjusted EBITDA number of $800,000, you could be kind of swing between 6 or 7x multiple on that 800K. And look at the difference between the valuations, 4.8 million versus 5.6 million. I mean, that's almost $1 million in difference, $800,000 in difference, because we're going from a 6 to a 7. So each time we're going up, it's, they call it one turn of EBITDA. So going from a 6x to a 7x is an extra $800,000. And each of these X basically means one turn of the EBITDA number. Anyway, we don't have to get into the technical jargon of that. So let's just say next practice down the road, somewhere near you in the state, whatever, maybe they're around $900,000 in adjusted EBITDA. Where might they be at? Well, they kind of are in this ballpark, but let's just call it 7x. It could be more, it could be less. We're just throwing up hypothetical numbers here, hypothetical practices, right? Let's say, just for argument's sake, they're doing 20% profit margin. So we're going to just do 20% profit margin of this $900,000 adjusted EBITDA practice. So that means they're approximately doing 4.5 million in top line revenue. And let's just say if we applied a 7x multiple, then this practice, 900K times 7, we convert that to dollars, move the decimal point, $6.3 million as a valuation. And then it's up to you and your broker. And depending on the strength of your practice, are you going to get 75% of that cash at close, or 80, or 90? And usually there's a 10% holdback in general, but call it a valuation of $6.3 million for the value of this hypothetical practice. Let's go to the next bucket here. $1 million in adjusted EBITDA. Again, I'm going to just change the color if I can to this adjusted EBITDA bucket, because I really want to kind of show so I just turned it green, just again, because this is really how we are all valuing practices, the adjusted EBITDA bucket, this column here, not so much this revenue number, because again, the revenue number could be like a really big revenue number. And if your margins are tight, you're still going to be in the same bucket as some of these other practices that are in the same adjusted EBITDA number that are maybe doing less revenue than you. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so let's just say for this practice, we're going to do that scenario again. 5 million in revenue. We're going to say at the 10% profit margin, and call it 8x and 8x multiple. As you can see, as the adjusted EBITDA increases, then the multiple increases. So $1 million in adjusted EBITDA, that might equate a practice to being in or warrant or negotiate an 8x multiple of that. Obviously, that's just, 1 million times 8, so it's $8 million. And let's say that this $5 million practice at 20% profit margin, so they're still in that range. If their margins are better, maybe they're at 9. So instead of 8 million, maybe they're at 9x, which would then be a $9 million valuation. So this is what we're seeing. This is kind of, again, this is a little bit of a back of the napkin math, because every practice is different. There's going to be so many factors. There's going to be so many factors in terms of how, like marketing, how you get patients, how are you retaining patients. But I wanted to just kind of go into this. This is what we're looking at. And yes, inflation is still present, but less than it was a year or so ago. Interest rates are higher. So there's a cost of capital, and that cost of capital, it could be The practices own equity out of their own bank accounts, their actual cash to buy some or all of your practice, or it could be investors, or it could be from SBA loans or from debt instruments. I mean, even the biggest companies, USPH, there's like two publicly traded physical therapy practices or physical therapy companies in the nation, and USPH is one of them. And I think it was earlier this year or last year, and everything is public. So a lot of their filings and all their information is public. And they had two different transactions where they raised equity, or they basically, not equity, excuse me. They took out two forms of debt, and it either totaled 350 million or it was like 100 million and 200 something million or something like that. I can't recall if it was at or around 300 million, but it was a lot of money. And they're a publicly traded company, and they basically can use debt like everyone else, like anyone that's watching or listening that has a house or a car, and they finance the car, or you have a mortgage for your house or your condo or whatever it might be, and you're financing that over time into the future. Same type of thing. Even the biggest of companies, even the biggest of corporates out there might use debt to acquire your practice or other practices out there. And we are looking to use the same type of thing. It doesn't really matter, but like I'm saying because cost of capital is a little bit higher now because interest rates are higher. So therefore there's higher dollar amounts of interest payments. And therefore you can expect potentially lower offers this year than 2021 and 2022. And now as we kind of move into 2024, maybe things will change, but this back of the napkin math is kind of a straightforward, appropriate structure. There's a lot of brokers and advisors that would maybe agree to some of this, and maybe they disagree to some other things that I've said. You got to take this with a grain of salt, and your practice might kind of fit into this bucket somewhere. And there's a lot of folks reaching out about asking me questions about cash pay, out of pocket or out of network practices versus in network practices, and do the valuations change? Are they similar or what? I mean, it really depends. But yes, cash practices might get a little bit of a boost of valuations, maybe compared to this, because they don't have the accounts receivable, and they have patients that pay the full amount with their credit card or debit card at the time of service, and that money hits their bank account and hits the practice's bank account in 3 to 5 days instead of 30 days, 60 days, whatever it might be, of healthcare payment and reimbursement. So does that factor into it? Yeah, it certainly does, but there's not a lot of cash practices that have scale. And so therefore, a lot of these valuations, a lot of these brokers and advisors we're kind of all interacting with a lot of practices that are in network, which have the revenue cycle management and plateaued reimbursement and all those considerations and all those things. But again, at the end of the day, comment below, subscribe to the Dave Kittle Show on YouTube, iTunes, or Spotify, but on YouTube, comment below. Let me know what you liked about this. Let me know where I'm completely wrong. Let me know where I'm out of line and that you're maybe pissed or whatever because you think your practice is worth more or whatever. You certainly can email me privately or reach out to me directly if you don't want to have anything public as well. And if you see this on LinkedIn, comment below. Let me know if I'm right, if I'm wrong, if I'm out of line. Let me know. But at the end of the day, this is approximately how your practice could be valued in the marketplace right now, 2023, 2024. Subscribe to the Dave Kittle Show on YouTube. We'll catch you next time here on the show. Bye now. Thanks. Hey, it's Dave Kittle. Are you a healthcare business owner or physical therapy practice owner who is looking to figure out your succession plan or exit strategy? We might be able to help. And in fact, we may be interested in acquiring your practice. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. Shoot me an email at dave@conciergepainrelief.com. That's DAVE at CONCIERGE painrelief.com. Or you can call me at any time, 646-781-8884.